Hello. Open to life. I'm going to talk today about my lifelong journey to connect with my inner self, my true nature, and how that journey required that I become aware of and include my physical body. I had no idea that the physical body had anything to do with spirituality. In the culture I grew up in, the mind and the intellect and their activities, thinking, analyzing, verbalizing, were highly rewarded, and they got all the attention. Matters of the heart, well, maybe romanticizing, sentimentality, fantasizing, that was for kids only, were okay. But feelings, no. If my parents had feelings, they only discussed them in private and never with us kids. Introspection was considered of little value, and maybe you were a bit too self-absorbed if you did it. And the body, its health and well-being, those were taken for granted. If something went wrong, you just went to the doctor. Well, as a child, I didn't really want to be in my body. It was dangerous, and it was out of control. When I was about 8, I started getting boils, big, ugly, painful boils. My mother took me to the doctor, who lanced them, covered them with huge dressings, and gave me painful penicillin shots. This went on for a couple of years, and no one, including me, inquired as to my feelings or what my inner nature was trying to express. Matters of the spirit, or the mysteries of life, were relegated to the church. All the answers were supposed to be there. Well, that didn't work for me. The things the church addressed were not the things I was seeking. And the church was confused about bodies, too. I was raised in an Episcopal church, and there was this part of the service that said, "My body and my blood, which are given for thee," at which point the grown-ups ate the body, this little white wafer thing, and drank the blood, which was wine. I didn't understand symbolism. I came to believe that it was best to keep my inner self, my true nature, to myself. And even deeper than that was the implicit understanding that feelings were dangerous. They were a nuisance. They were even shameful. Basically, they were taboo. As a child, I wondered about a lot of things. As a teenager, I felt I had a sense of inner truth that sprang from ideals deep within and which I was passionate about. As a young adult, I sought to discover my inner self, my true nature. But since all of these things were not considered useful for living life, I did not see any practical way to live them out or to make a living from them. And I was to discover, much later in life, that there's also a much deeper reason for burying feelings and any sense of true nature. The mind could make them go unconscious, especially those feelings of early childhood, birth to 4 years old. This going unconscious trick works because the survival parts of the brain, which develop early, makes a rule about those nonverbal feeling memories, and it codes them as dangerous for survival. The more cognizant parts of the brain are not yet developed, and so there's no consciousness of them. So there was a way that I knew myself through my parents' eyes, and there was my true nature and my feelings. But these were locked up, the latter were locked up, as if behind castle walls, with the drawbridge pulled up and held in place by a primitive fear of my very survival. And so the schism within was formed. I pursued several good careers using my mental capacities of thinking, analyzing, and verbalizing. the hungry place within, that fear that could not be acknowledged because then I would cease to exist, that hungry place I continued to feed with mental knowledge. There was lots of that available, but it left me feeling out of step with myself, and life was still confusing. Skipping ahead. I was in a long relationship with a wonderful man. However, years into that relationship, I, by chance, got introduced to women's liberation. A class was offered and I signed up. I remember in the first meeting, when we were going around introducing ourselves, I said, for sure, we're not really going to talk about power. The eyebrows of the organizers went up. Well, of course, we did talk about power, personal empowerment, and strong feelings. I began to get in touch with deeply buried anger within me. I didn't understand what was happening to me. Some months later, I walked out of the long-term relationship and onto a long, wandering path of slowly and blindly working with this schism within. Well, long story short, another relationship, and this time marriage, brought me to Des Moines in 1988. There was something about Des Moines and Iowa that rooted me. It wasn't the marriage, because that ended 5 years later. Perhaps it was this time in my life. I had enough life experience under my belt to feel more centered and even daring to come more from my gut than my mind. What was my gut? I didn't know, but I was living more from it. Perhaps it could have been the dream that I and my soon-to-be divorced husband had upon moving here, that one of us would start a business doing something we really, really loved. Well, he didn't have an idea about that for himself, but I did. Also, he had the larger salary, so he kept that and I started the business. This passionate dream of mine had started years before with a music tape that I had bought at a little stand in New York City. It was called Ecstasy, and it was by a German composer called Duter. It was soothing, it was relaxing, and it was wordless. It moved me in some deep way that I wanted to move, but did not understand or have words for. Well, it turns out it was a new genre of ambient music called space music. When I got to Des Moines, I went to a local music store and asked the owner if he carried space music. He'd heard of it, he said, but he wouldn't carry it because no one in Des Moines would be interested. Well, then, said I, I'll do it myself, said the little red hen. What was this music that created space? I didn't know consciously, but I did know that it created space within me, which was soothing. Still, I had no idea how to go about it, doing it myself. Well, life stepped up with a solution. My then husband was on the board of the Iowa Council of International Understanding, and he got me on the board as well. We were both professionally involved with refugee resettlement for many years. At one of the meetings, the director said they needed a volunteer to take over the newsletter. A hand went up. I looked around the room. It was my hand. That was 1988, and I knew nothing about using a computer to create a newsletter. I did own a Mac SE, remember those little tiny screen things? And an early version of PageMaker. Apparently, some part deep within me knew that if given the challenge, I could learn how to make that newsletter. And if I could make a newsletter, then I could also create a mail order catalog through which I could bring space music to Iowa. The little red hen was in operation. I started Morning Light Books and Tapes in 1990, and in 1991, I mailed the first catalog. After publishing 3 catalogs by 1992, I opened Morning Light as a store at 3111 Ingersoll. It was both a music and a bookstore, focusing on the connections between mind, body, and spirit. Now, intellectually, I understood all of this, but the schisms between my mind, my body, and my spirit were still there, though the gaps were closing. It was a grand store and a grand decade for these genres: spirituality, body awareness, health and healing, intuition, meditation, animal communications, angels. These topics were exploding all over the country. Well, by 1999, I took assessment of what I loved doing at the store and what I didn't. I loved helping people find what they were looking for. I hated accounting. So, again, to the center of me, that pointed very clear to becoming a massage therapist. No one was more astonished than I. Being a massage therapist was not on any to-do list I had ever had. Maybe it was the challenge or the call to courage. So I began massage school in November of 1999, sold Morning Light books and tapes in April of 2000, and by later in 2000, I was a state licensed and nationally certified massage therapist. The massage classes were a blast. They blew my mind. They gave me space, inside and out. They expanded my awareness. I began to feel grounded, literally, figuratively, in my body rather than in my mind. I also began, in 2001, a 4-year course of study and group process work called Pathwork. Well, this was in Michigan. So besides my massage therapy practice, I was also driving to Michigan 7 times a year for Pathwork process weekends. Pathwork is a body of wisdom exploring our true inner nature and our outer personalities, which have their defenses and denials. And all of this is a way to finally open to our real feelings and claim our spirituality. So I was deep into the nonverbal body on the one hand and the verbal spirit on the other. But I still had a hunger deep inside that needed the food of connection. I was learning that the body is the virtual library of my own experiential history. So what the mind had made unconscious long ago was still carried within my feelings, which were carried in my body. And to prove all this, a lab scientist named Dr. Candace Pert published her findings and her proof of that in her book, Molecules of Emotion. And then later she made a set of CDs called Your Body is Your Subconscious Mind. So we were all waking up to that. In 2004, I took a class in zero balancing. Now, the teacher was a physical therapist who had been practicing zero balancing, or ZB, for years, and she had used it together with a psychologist at the University of Arizona to treat people who had experienced trauma. I wondered, how could work done at the physical level heal trauma? Well, I found out through ZB. It's a hands-on body work, but it is not massage. To be certified in it, you already have to have a license to touch in some profession. So there are certified ZBers who are physical therapists, massage therapists, occupational therapists, chiropractors, acupuncturists. But with this modality, we have a hands-on way to work with the life force energy through the structural body, the bones, by consciously touching both of them at once, the energy body and the bones. And this recognizes the relationship between the mysterious energy that runs all of our life systems and the physical body that it inhabits and animates. And just like any intimate relationship, when they are in sync, you feel good, and when they're out, you don't. So now I have both verbal and experiential tools, and with them I can acknowledge the castle, the drawbridge, and the primitive survival fears that have held it all in place. And for me, this is spiritual, integrating the mind, the body, and the mysterious animating force. The physical body is bringing me home. Thank you.